Chapter 3. The Huntsman's Heart. The following is a letter sent to the central government of Justice Grimm. It was left inside an official informant apparatus post office drop box. The writer of the letter claims to be Doc, the last surviving of the 7 dwarfs made famous by the Snow White movie. Due to circumstances involving a certain individual who is suspected of wanting Doc done away with, namely, the person of interest in question goes by the title of the Huntsman. The Justice Intel Ministry has doubts that Doc wrote this letter, but in all likelihood, Doc is probably dead and has been for longer than we even suspect. Although this is a creative and possible scenario, the whole thing is probably just misinformation. And that would suggest that to our knowledge and collective assessment that Snow White and the 7 dwarfs has absolutely no basis in reality whatsoever. Editor's note: a lot of the blocky dwarf prose and style has been smooth over, a feat of which could not have been possible if it wasn't for my friend from the Intel Corps who told me on record.
If this isn't Doc, whoever wrote this is a fluent and master crafter of the dwarf system of writing. So it's possible that there's another dwarf, the 8th and unknown of the collection, who has been pretending to be Doc. The letter was sealed with a curious silver-colored wax. I've been informed the envelope it was sent in was made from a specific and traceable plant that grows in a specific area east of the Rhine River.
Also, it should remain in the reader's mind that the dwarves are not known to be literary writers, but are skilled users of runes to communicate. Doc, if he is actually real, would be the first most popular, published, read, and well-circulated dwarf author that we know of. The reader has been spared any recreation of stuttering that is shown in the movie. We have a reason to suspect that those were only markers or traits given to help the production crew tell the dwarfs apart when they were in costume. But it wouldn't be impossible that Doc, or whoever that dwarf is, might be based on a Kaiser Sosky archetype, in other words pretending, as dwarf societies are not given to letting their youth develop with such oddities. The fact that diamonds are involved in a criminally insane huntsman, a mentally deranged queen, poisoned apples, loony mirrors, magic potions, and necrophilia are all part of the familiar legend. It's no wonder that our efforts into the Snow White myth taxed even our most seasoned archivist. This letter, however, would seem to indicate that Doc, being a scientist, totally rejects the black magic explanation and gives us a biological toxicologist opinion. The letter is transcribed below.
Dear Justice Grimm, it has been so long that I almost don't know where to start. The beginning is as good as place is any. My name is Doc. I am the older brother of the family of 7 dwarfs, and this is my confession. You see, haven't much time left. I must not have it on my consciousness. I know the people in Archive Ministry will doubt the legitimacy of my claims, and that's their prerogative. I only hope it is in the honest and sound mindset of the readers who may take from this understanding of how such a weight had to be exercised before I die. To do otherwise would invite demons and devils to force me into the mine where I would face my brothers for eternity. So I beg the reader to put aside their misgivings about the truth behind anything regarding the story of Snow White. As you are about to find out, dear reader, what we have taken for granted, as the fact of the matter is a matter of fact after all. Take, for instance, the diamond mine. I'd say that would be the most excellent place to start, yes. Just as I suspect it will end there seems fitting. The mine, the family mine, our heritage and our curse. Let's start with the obvious. It was by no means exclusively a diamond mine. But as far as the jewels go, it would be safe to say that the shiny rocks made up for any big part of the overall profits. And yes, we found all the other stones as well, but not as much as the diamonds. Little gold, but also lots of silver. Our family had long dug up and crafted in silver for everything we could imitate, like spoons, beds, frames, toys, belts, buckles, buckets, even mirrors. If ever a true magic mirror on the wall was a reality, it would be one of the silver mirrors our family sold to the royal family in exchange for the right to mine that certain area of the realm. The trade-off could not have been more one-sided. The process to make that mirror releases a toxic fume. When silver is used with mercury and fuses into the mirror, extended interactions with the silver and mercury-stuffed mirrors could easily lead to the insanity of those who stood in front of it. You see, I am not a believer in that sort of dark magic voodoo, however. I have seen things that make me question my own existence to the point of worry, but I digress the question. I'm sure the Justice Ministry has been dying to ask me is, was Snow White a real person? And the answer is yes and no. The young princess who stayed with my family was not called Snow White. That name has been etched in the legend, and it has stuck. Penelope, the second of the Earl Cartwright, and his wife Duchess was born pale and was always falling ill. I may call her Snow White occasionally because it is easy to use the familiar. The name of the regent queen was Mercia Troy, and she had only just lost her husband to some strange disease. Looking back, it's pretty obvious that the king was poisoned by Mercia. I, for my part, have a more scientific explanation as to why the queen was called mad. And it wasn't because of any dark mumbo-jumbo magic nonsense. It was because the mirror, her so-called magic mirror, a thing of production that tends to leave poisonous traces from the byproduct of mercury and silver being polished to shine. Mercia may have been looking into that mirror her whole life slowly, turning into a vile creature. It could also be a family thing. Both Mercia and Penelope were pale and bone, thin from birth. It seems both were given to bits of rage and diminished mental capacity at times. Whatever it wasn't magic. Snow White was plagued with chronic fatigue syndrome, and probably epilepsy. Her eating habits were spoiled with meats, and who knows what kind of parasites. Meaning she could never get enough nourishment, no matter how much she was fed. If she was even able to stay awake long enough to finish her dinner, poor thing. And I hope that answers that. As far as the other issue, The story itself is my own little mix and match of little fairy tales of my own. You see, the timeline that would correspond with that of the movie would jump back and forth so much that the reader would be lost very quickly, so I will attempt to explain it briefly. It all goes back to the huntsman. Now in the story he's at the beginning, but the fact that my brothers and I were also quite anarchistic with the lucrative funds from the mine. See, when she was just a tiny pale baby, we were raising the huntsman up to be the man that he is today for the good or the bad. The huntsman's name is Ivan, and his lineage is traced back to some old Greek king or hero twaddle. The lad was the same age as Penelope, when she would come to our home, but I'm getting ahead of myself again, with Bashful, Sneezy, and Happy away on scouting. It was Dopey, Grumpy, Sleepy, and myself who were the father figures for Ivan. He needed no more than one father, but had too many with not a single kind of female figure in his life, and that was my fault. I kept him from the social interactions as best I could, and when he was old enough to strike out, he had no defenses to block the Queen's hooks. We are suppliers to the royal family. They need our minerals, and we need their market access. Eventually, Mercia and Ivan met and could hardly be separated. He was infatuated with her and in love, you could say. So when Mercia had to marry the High Prince of the realm, well, you can imagine. It was shortly after Mercia's marriage, and rise to be queen, that Ivan found a pig named Wilbur and cut out his heart, and then he sent that heart to Mercia as a wedding gift. I'm sure the sentiment was lost on the wanton and selfishly cruel queen either way, and Ivan began to make claims about how he was going to go into the woods and cut out the heart of the next girl that he found alone. I told him that he should never say those things like that in public ever, and if he was my dwarf son, I would have disciplined him much stronger and firmer, but I had to let it go. He was young. He had to learn heartbreak, but he became dark and was more often not claiming the hearts of any and all creatures that he came across in the woods. Then one day, he found the body of a peasant girl who had been caught by her long hair in the trees that stretched up to an old tower. The poor girl dramatically fell somehow, but hung herself from those branches. He told us that he had taken the body down respectively and buried her. But when Bashful's scouting party returned, they happened to discover the corpse, unburied and disrespected, having been sealed off by a thorny barrier that the huntsman had dragged together to keep the animals from taking off with the body. Among other groups of details, the young girl's heart had been cut out, but no one ever found it. It brings us back to the awful memories of confronting Ivan, and having to hear his side of the story all lies entirely. He was caught, and he had shamed us all. Grumpy and Sneezy dug the girl a real grave, and in our own fashion, we buried her in a secret spot, but we were sloppy. He followed the undertakers so found the graveyard. The girl's head and long frazzed hair was hanging on a post outside of our mine the next day. We found other parts of her, but never the whole. We burned the pieces and vowed to ban Ivan from our home. He was exiled and became the boy toy for Mercia, who would allow him to stay with her in the castle. I have heard stories and rumors, really, that Ivan and Mercy would routinely ambush maidens at the castle. I thought Mercia would help, but the Queen had access to a library of chemicals. She had every ingredient she needed for those so-called potions, and we can say with some certainty that chemicals are not magic. It was also said that Ivan and Mercia had been, at one time, very, very nice to the maidens, even allowing them access to the king's woods, but that's for a later story. I don't believe Mercy actually consumed the heart of those maidens, but Ivan had likely already done so and would have given some to the Queen, who was already being poisoned by that silver mirror. Ivan was unavoidable. We had to go into the town at some point, but we used our discretion and kept close watch when we were near him. Eventually, the years brought more indifference between us. We, too, were not innocent. There had been a dozen or so graves dug secretly around our mine where explorers and prospectors had been buried, and I wish there had been an alternative. But no one at the time was allowed to know of the mine's existence if the good people at Justice Grimm desire to recover those bodies. I have made a few maps, but will send them separately, and I plan to have it all released the day that I die. Yes, for now I'm still alive, but these confessions come at a time for me when my time is drawn to a finality. We had our own adventures in the story, long before Ivan kidnapped Penelope, and his relationship with the prince, in the story, which is far from the truth. Indeed, the story has been cleaned up vigorously. The prince was a ward of the Queen's, a prisoner guest from the neighboring realm. His name was Eric, and he was to marry Penelope. But Eric was not into pale skinny girls at all, so he and Ivan conspired to have Snow White tossed down the well. It would have happened to, if Ivan hadn't grown to like Penelope after living with her in the castle with Eric. He didn't want to lose any of them now. The plan changed, and Ivan convinced his partner in crime to switch places, he be the prince, and Eric be the hunter. What happened at the well that day, Ivan had been torn between Penelope and Eric. But Snow White had to go, and the best way Ivan even knew of that was to bring her to us, to the cabin. He gave us a lot of gold, and asked us to take care of Penelope. It wasn't easy getting a teenage girl to fall into a consistent schedule, but she picked it up. Eventually, she did teach us some bathing habits. Previously unknown, that part is true. You might be asking, so if Ivan escorted Snow White to the cabin, what was that part of the story, where she came inside, and we aren't there? Never happened. In fact, if we had discovered Snow White in our cabin without our permission, we would have killed her. Our secret was too precious to have anyone be made aware of it. I guess we thought too much of ourselves at the time, who knows? The huntsman's gold was good enough, and upon return to the castle, there was a meeting between Mercia and Ivan, But the plaything was not there when confronted. Ivan gave Mercia Eric's heart instead. The queen consumed the heart, and only later discovered that it was her ward's heart and not Snow White's. But by that time, Ivan was gone, and he came to us, and we agreed to keep Penelope there for 2 more weeks, and he paid us again. And again, after all, Ivan did rescue Snow White, although I would point out that this is really the only highlighted feature of his story. Does one selfless rescue of a sickly princess excuse the necrophilia or the homicides that he carried out for Mercia? So who marries Snow White? Well, as I have said, she didn't really exist. We were paid house Penelope, and she had to be taught to get along. The real story was always the mine, the silver, the precious gems. It was all ours, and I had them all. They were all tossed alive down that mine in the end. Dopey helped me, but he couldn't live with himself, and he was the one who tipped you off to this location. Penelope was moved to various realms and shuffled back and forth officially, till she landed back to the queen, who was aged and batty beyond all reason. Posing as the prince, it seems Ivan managed to kidnap her again, and this time, as far as I have been made aware of, they are now somewhere far, far away and living happily ever after.